Okay, sir. Now we are live. Sulatana, please, you may start.
Hello and namaskar everyone. Welcome to Decoding Realpolitik. We are pleased to announce that our platform has reached its 1 month milestone, and over this time we have successfully conducted 5 insightful sessions addressing various pressing issues including the Pahalgam attack, the Siliguri corridor, and the evolving crisis in Bangladesh. And to mark this achievement, we are excited to present our inaugural special lecture today. It is my immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Rajdeep Sarkar, who will be delivering today's special lecture. Dr. Sarkar has recently been awarded a PhD from the University of Hyderabad, and he currently teaches political science at the NTR Degree College for Women in Hyderabad. His research interest encompasses international politics, grand strategy, and the strategic impacts of critical emerging technologies. He is an avid reader of history and literature, and as a thinker, he has an analytical mindset, and he often enjoys taking up the provocative issues and questions. Welcome, sir. We are honored to have you with us today.
Thank you very
So,
much.
before I invite Dr. Sarkar to begin his talk, I would like to give a brief overview of today's lecture. So, despite the universal condemnation of terrorism, why do states, particularly great powers, adopt ambiguous policies towards terrorism? Why has a truly global zero tolerance policy not materialized? Dr. Sarkar will explore these questions from the very realist perspective using the balance of power logic. Dr. Sarkar will take up two cases: the recent American outreach to Syria's now ruling Hayat Tahrir al Sham and Chinese shielding of Pakistan based terror groups targeting India. To test the analytical concepts, the goal is for the richer understanding of the primacy of great power conflicts in IR, the possibility of global consensus on a truly zero tolerance policy towards terrorism. So I would like to request Dr. Sarkar to start with his lecture. The floor is yours now, sir. Thank you. You may start now.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope we have a good session. I'm very happy that your initiative to start such a group, bringing together research scholars. I think this is a really good thing that you guys are doing, and I hope to interact with you in the future as well. So today, I thought that it would be quite a with all the recent interest in terrorism because of the tragedy in Pahalgam, and because we in India live surrounded by many threats from terrorist groups. It's a very complex security environment we live in, and if we try to analyze what kind of threats we face, I think there's bound to be very different points of view and so on. But I'm not going to do that today. What I instead am going to do is that I'm going to consider some fundamental issues related to terrorism. Uh, I have in my abstract I have said that there is universal condemnation of terrorism. I think terrorism stands for the moral equivalent of evil today, and yet we don't seem to have much global unity on how to actually deal with terrorism. We see many different positions being taken, many different approaches. So, why does it happen? That is the basic question that I would be addressing today. The first part of my lecture, I'm going to focus on certain theoretical aspects, and then I will be applying those theoretical points or theoretical assumptions on terrorism. Let me start with some preliminary considerations about the fundamental nature of politics. There must be a lot of, the viewers, many of them are from political science background, others are not, but more or less, I guess whoever is joining us today is interested in politics. So what really is politics. Perhaps we don't think about it all that much. I have a definition of politics. It is an activity that is fundamentally competitive in nature. Issues arise as a result of human beings living together in a society. There are many different issues related to resources, related to power, and so on. And politics is the activity that is fundamentally competitive. It is competition for power to set the rules and norms. If I can use the definition given by David Easton, it is the authoritative allocation of values. And since it is such a fundamentally competitive activity, it always carries the potential to escalate to conflict. We see that politics all around us is filled with tensions, is filled with hostility, and it is not uncommon for politics to even escalate to violent conflict. Okay, and the reason why we have so much conflict around politics is because there is so much at stake. The winners get to decide what would be the rules, the norms, and how resources would be distributed, and so on, while the losers usually bear the brunt of the winners. Some may disagree with this definition of politics, but I find that this is quite an empirical definition. We can come to that later. And the way that I have defined politics now, we will find commonalities between domestic and international politics. It is a fundamentally competitive activity. However, there is a key difference between domestic and international politics. In domestic politics, we have institutions that enjoy legitimacy. We have the legislative, executive, judiciary, and we can see that there are different levels of legitimacy that institutions develop across countries, some more, some less. Uh, However, usually we do find that there are relatively stable governments within countries. So, political order is the norm in domestic politics, but at the same time, there are disagreements, and when those disagreements cannot be accommodated by the institutions, then there is always the possibility of civil war starting. In international politics, however, we find that there is no common superior, there is no agency which is above sovereign nation states. And this is the fundamental nature of international politics, since states do not really have any higher agency to get any protection from or to appeal to when they face threats. States are essentially self-help units. They have to fend for themselves. Their security is their business. If they do not care for their security, then nobody else does. This is an irreducible condition of international politics, and this is what sets it apart from domestic politics. So, to summarize the contrast, in domestic politics, order is the norm, and disorder or anarchy is the exception. Whereas in international politics, we say that the international order is anarchic, which is not to mean that there cannot be cooperation, which is not to mean that states are always fighting or warring against each other. It merely means that there is no common superior that states can turn to, and so their security interests are their uh, primary preoccupation. Having said this, let us move to what are the main characteristics of international politics. In international relations, we find that the relationship between states are structured by power. States are constantly engaged in security competition with each other, and they are quite sensitive to the fact that some other state, a rival or an adversary, may get the better of them by amassing power. Power can be defined in a number of ways: uh, economic power, political power, diplomatic, military power, and so on. But states are quite sensitive to the fact that other states may be able to become more powerful, and if they do so, there is always the possibility that those states might be exercising their power on another state. The reason why I spent some time on these basics of international relations is just to give a sense of how important security is for every state. The important thing to note here is that states cannot really be sure or be certain about the intentions of other states. They, for example, if there is, suppose, a diplomacy between two states, how do we know that the other state is not lying? How do we know that the other state is not cheating? Perhaps the other state is acting with righteousness. Perhaps the diplomatic or the political elite of the other state does not want to cheat us, but we can never be sure. Secondly, intentions may always change. For example, uh, you look at the US, its attitude towards Europe. 20 years ago, there was a completely different kind of relationship. 10 years ago, there was a completely different kind of relationship. But today, there is a US Europe EU relations have changed over the last few years. So states always can change their policy, and if in case a state changes its policy towards another state, the other state does not really have get much time or get much resources to bring to the fore if the policy of the other state changes. And this is the reason why security becomes the primary preoccupation or the first interest of all states. They want to be in a state of preparedness, and since we live in times of nationalism and deep industries, when all states have military power which far exceed anything which was imaginable maybe 300, 200 or 300 years ago. Therefore, even in peacetime, states are always sensitive to the fact that new military infrastructure, innovations in military organization, shifting alliances, shifting strategic priorities, etc., can really create problems for them. Realism tries to understand this kind of behavior of states, which from other points of view, like an ethical point of view or an institutionalist point of view, may seem like quite narrow. Realism tries to understand this fundamental uh, tendency of state behavior in terms of the balance of power. Balance of power is a theory that many people have written about, many people use it to think about international relations, and we probably would find quite a healthy division between those who agree to the precepts of balance of power and those who don't agree to the precepts of balance of power. What really is balance of power? I will uh, cite an image which was given by Martin White. He said that the balance of power is like a pair of weighing scales. A pair of weighing scales, when objects are set on a pair of weighing scales, whichever side is, has the heavier object, that obviously, goes down, whereas the other side is lifted up. This is how balance of power works in international relations. If one particular country were to add to its military budget, were to procure new arms, or were to make some changes in its organization and so on, its its side of the scale gets heavier. And since power is relative, other states which might be geographically contiguous, or in the case of great powers, they may be separated by geography, but they have interests all over the world. They feel the effects of the other state adding to its power. Or a second scenario: suppose there are three states and state A attacked state B. State C has a few options. It can remain neutral, it can remain indifferent, but in most cases, we see that state C does not remain neutral or indifferent or inactive because when state A attacks state B, state C would not like to face a situation in which state B has been completely defeated and then state A is free to attack state C as well. So whenever there is some kind of a change in the balance of power or when there is an imbalance of power, states uh, always want to somehow restore the balance. This is a very dynamic process, but at the same time, it is a constant process. No balance is permanent. Balance of power always changes, and this is the fundamental stuff of international politics. Now, let me come to. So, this is how realism tries to understand international politics and the behavior of states, and realists also emphasize that because of the fundamentally competitive and conflictual nature of international politics, there simply cannot be a permanent peace. There can be peace when there is a workable balance of power. There are several examples of such, instances. For example, everybody talks about the concert of Europe after the defeat of Napoleon. Then there is the bipolar balancing of the Cold War and so on, when great powers in a system are able to manage the shifting balance of power in such a way that it is in their mutual interest not to break out into conflict. But there are also plenty of examples or instances where the balance did not work and it inevitably led to wars. So realists only emphasize that wars are an ever-present possibility because so much is at stake, and also that states are extremely sensitive to these questions of security. Geopolitics, in other words, is based on the fundamental security interest of states and what each state perceives as the balance of power with respect to its rivals or adversaries and so on. Now, there are a number of uh, criticisms of realism. I would speak about two such theoretical schools which are extremely influential in their criticism of realism. And these two schools are liberalism and collective security. Both have been very influential over the 20th century. Many of our international institutions today are founded on the basis of these theories, grounded in these theories. And a lot of our scholarship as well as media speak from the points of view of liberalism and collective security. So together, these two theories exert considerable influence on our thinking about international politics. Let me spend a couple of minutes on telling you what are the basics of liberalism and collective security. Liberalism is a theory which more or less started in the 18th century in IR, and then it had a second coming in the 19th century, and finally we have neoliberalism, which was, which had its moment in the 80s and after the end of the Cold War. As a theory of international relations, liberalism is mainly concerned with the idea of mutual interests. Liberals criticize realists because they think that realists are way too focused on the conflictual or competitive aspects. They also think that realists define state interests in very narrow terms, and what they instead emphasize is that states can have mutual interests. Every issue in international relations need not be looked at from the point of view of relative interests, not in terms of uh, that the gain of one state has to be the loss of another state and so on. They rather say that it could be a win-win situation. And there are a number of issues. For example, it could be trade, it could be environment, it could be protection of space and so on. In all these issues, liberals say that there can be a consensus and there can be agreements even among great powers. So they focus on the idea of mutual interests, and they are also in favor of building institutions that can overcome the trust gap or the trust factor, where realists say that one state can never really be certain about the intentions of other states, and that is why they engage in security competition. Liberals say that if effective, good institutions are created, then states actually can overcome the trust gap and they can cooperate on a number of issues. However, I must also point out that liberalism does not, the liberal IR theory does not provide a good explanation of why states are so preoccupied with their security interests. It also does not tell us what a state can do if it is faced with military aggression. And this is something that liberals concede. They openly, many of them openly say, for example, that uh, the economy and security are two completely different dimensions, and they don't really offer any explanation as to why security is so important or what states should do in order to render the security question less important. But they do try to construct a parallel international world of international relations on the basis of mutual cooperation and so on. Now let us come to collective security. Collective security, unlike liberalism, does acknowledge the central importance of force or violence or the threat of uh, violent conflict in international relations, but it is quite different from realist theory because it wholeheartedly rejects the idea that balance of power is the main preoccupation of states and peace and war are reflections of shifting balance of power. Instead, what advocates of collective security say is that states ought to move to a system. States should move to a system in which they have to try and overcome the trust deficit that they feel. They also say that institutions can be built where which can help states have feel trust towards each other. And the main thrust of collective security theory is that since all states are required to give up violence, if one state, or let us say non-state actors, if any group or any state were to break this pact of non-violence, were to break the pact, common understanding that all disputes can be settled peacefully, then all states must come together and they should be able to mount a common response and punish the violator. Okay, this is collective security theory. The League of Nations was founded on based on the collective security theory. Everybody knows that it failed. I won't get into the reasons why it failed. And also, the United Nations, which came about after the Second World War, also contains important points from the collective security system, although it is up for debate whether UN today still follows collective security system or not. So it is a theory that has been quite influential because many scholars of IR tend to think that there can be a common response, or suppose there is one bad actor, he can be taken out if all others were to come together. And one of the examples we are given about the effectiveness of the collective security system is the Gulf War of 1991, when close to 30 countries joined in an alliance, and Saddam Hussein's Iraq was defeated within a matter of days, and Kuwait was freed from the Iraqi invasion. Uh, however, let me point out a couple of issues, however, with collective security. One, it does not, again, just like liberalism, it does not give any prescription or does not explain how states can overcome this trust gap. Second, uh, it does not say how many bad actors can a system handle at any given point of time. For example, if you see the situation today, if there are wars going on in two or three different parts of the world, can a collective security system really manage all those conflicts at the same time? How can alliances be built that take on the one side Russia, or on another side, let us say North Korea, on another side Iran? So there are a number of questions regarding the efficacy of the collective security system. Thirdly, if there are so many bad actors, and collective security theory does allow some space for bad actors to be there in a system, but we also have an additional question that why should every other state uh, put any faith at all in a collective security system if there are going to be bad actors, or if there are going to be some states who do not join the system? Again, good answers have not been found, to these answers, and maybe this is one of the reasons why the collective security system, although it sounds quite good on paper, perhaps has not really worked out. Now I have given a brief overview of three competing systems. Mind you, these three systems do not only provide explanations, but they also have a normative dimension in the sense that uh, foreign policy might be conducted on the basis of whichever theory that the foreign policy elite of a country might subscribe to. Now let us come to terrorism. I think terrorism, we all can agree, is a moral evil. And there are a number of reasons for this. The first is that terrorists do not distinguish between innocent people and those who can be held responsible for some actions. The law of distinction between civilians and combatants is not recognized by terrorists. We need not go too deep into this discussion. It is quite apparent, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. Uh, the targeting of innocence is something that really riles us up. It makes us feel as though there can be nothing as bad as this. And because most of us have grown up in the era when, for the US, which is definitely the most powerful country, the most powerful state in the world, fought a war against terrorism. And since US foreign policy has such a large influence, not only in the way that other states set their policy, but also in the way that we think about international relations, some assumptions have become quite commonplace today. I spoke about the moral evil of terrorism. That is something that we all can agree about. But there are also some other assumptions. For example, the notion or the belief that when it comes to terrorism, all of humanity would come together, and civilized humanity will find some way, whether it is an institutional way by choking the finances of terrorism or by sanctioning terrorists and so on, or even through the use of force, terrorism can be defeated. So there is an assumption that collective action can actually work when it comes to terrorism. And in some moments, for example, in the immediate aftermath of the Pahalgam attack, when we all felt, uh, it was probably the most inhuman thing that I have ever seen in my life. We all felt that there is a good amount of substance behind such an assumption. Why can't we all unite against such kind of terrorism? Why can't all the civilized peoples of the world come together? It seemed like the most obvious thing. And yet, what we saw is that there was quite a bit of, there is quite a bit of divergence when it comes to the positions taken by different states. I think when it comes to the the US reaction. All of us feel like there is a great betrayal and so on. Then China, we predicted that China would take a kind of ambiguous policy and so on. We'll come to a lot those issues, but the point is that the kind of condemnation that we expected, that has not really materialized. Okay, uh, so why is that the case? Now let me try to apply the fundamental precepts of the three theories that I have taken up and apply them to terrorism. First, let us take liberalism. Liberalism says that there can be mutual interest between states, and apart from certain fundamental issues, where let us say one country were to launch a military invasion on another, apart from such issues, there is a healthy margin of cooperation. Now, terrorism would definitely seem to me to be one such case where, if indeed states can have some mutual interest, they should be able to cooperate on this kind of an issue. In fact, that is the reason why we say that there should be a global zero tolerance policy to terrorism and so on, because it seems to all of us that terrorists are ultimately opposed to peace, to prosperity, to progress, and so on. So, if there is one issue area in international politics where liberalism should work, I think it should have been terrorism. However, we see that there's not a lot of agreement between how states look at terrorism at all, or different terrorist groups at all. Now, let us come to collective security. Collective security, the basic idea is that if there is one state or one group of people, non-state actors, whatever it is, if they were to break the pact of peaceful dispute settlement, if they were to unilaterally go on an aggressive path, then all others should come together and they should effectively nullify that bad actor. Again, it seems to me that collective security has a much stronger case if it were to be applied to terrorism rather than to any state, because when it comes to a state there are all kinds of considerations which are involved, but when it comes to terrorism it's not fundamentally a state. So even if you are thinking from the collective security point of view, then states, uh, at least quite a number of states, should be able to come together and they should be able to defeat terrorism. But we have not really seen much of that. I think the last real case of collective security that we can talk about in terms of a common response to terrorism was between 2014 to 2017, when the Islamic State, ISIS, gained territory in Syria and Iraq. But even then, if you were to analyze uh, the positions of states, or how they conducted military actions, it was not really that that there was a big alliance of different states, great powers coming together to defeat one common terrorist threat, but that all the great powers or regional major powers which had stakes in Syria, which were involved in Syria much before ISIS became a reality, they took their own actions, because ISIS was a case in which morality and strategy converged. So it was quite an, in that sense, it was quite easy to get some kind of consensus. But at the same time, it did not really fulfill the conditions laid down by collective security. Great powers and major powers pursued their own interests. It's simply that there was a point of convergence. So, my point here is that both liberalism and collective security do not adequately explain why is it that cooperation or any collective security mechanism where states come together to defeat the evil of terrorism do not materialize. And they also are unable to explain why, despite this clear, unambiguous evil quality of terrorism that we are all, that we all understand, why is it that states still continue to kind of take ambiguous policies, do not really, give, wholehearted condemnations, or even if they do condemn a particular case of terrorism, they still leave some kind of, a plausible gap for states which support terrorism to wriggle out and so on. Why exactly does it happen? And here I would return to realism. Let me uh, just recount how exactly the war on terror unfolded. I think 20 years between 2001 to 2021. When we read IR in the future, this would be called the era of war, global war on terrorism. And certainly we can, narrate what happened from a number of perspectives. But let me just try to briefly recapitulate some of the things which happened, but from a realist perspective. Now, one of the things that is, said in support of both liberalism and collective security, or just this general notion that great powers, regardless of their historical differences, regardless of their strategic interest, can come together on a common platform against terrorism, is the fact that just after the 9/11 attack in 2001, there was cooperation between the great powers of today, US, China, Russia as well, if we consider it as a, well, it's a weak great power, probably not a strong great power, but still a great power. There was cooperation between them. The United Nations Security Council, for example, had a unanimous position. The 1267 committee, which is, which used to be called the Taliban Sanctions Committee back then, had a very clear mandate. Even today, it is the committee in the UN which sanctions terrorists and so on. So there was a lot of cooperation. But does it prove the theoretical assumptions of liberalism and collective security correct, or does it prove the assumptions of realism correct? Let me, give some background to why this security cooperation evolved between the great powers at that time. Firstly, we are talking about a time when, the period between 1991 and 2001 is probably called the unipolar moment. But even in 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, I think Russia and China were far weaker than they are today. So there was a significant gap, and we were not really talking in terms of any great power conflict back then. So this was one of the reasons. But there is a second more important reason, and that is that what the 9/11 attack represented, or what the emergence of Al Qaeda and Taliban represented back then, was not just, this crazy global religion influenced terrorism. It was not just that, but it also represented some real geopolitical issues. If you were to take a look at the map of Central Asia, then Afghanistan borders both Russia and China. Afghanistan became the epicenter of extremist, radical terrorism, extremist terrorism, whatever we call it. And both China and Russia and India as well feared that terrorism would not remain limited to Afghanistan alone. Extremist movements would spread. For Russia, Russia took viewed Afghanistan through the lens of its Central Asian neighbors. Russia had seen a civil war in Uzbekistan throughout the 90s. Russia faced problems in Dagestan and Chechnya in the 1990s. So basically, for Russia, containing the Taliban, containing the defeating the Al Qaeda was realpolitik in that sense, because they did not want to face extremist terrorism closer to their borders. And similarly for China, why it has invested so heavily uh, against any kind of Turkistani movement, because that would jeopardize the security of Xinjiang province. So they did cooperate, but they did not cooperate for the reasons we are told by liberals and also advocates of collective security. We also see that this security cooperation began to break down soon after some of the regional powers began to realize that the Americans were in Afghanistan for the long haul. It was not a matter of defeating the Al Qaeda and then getting out. The Americans, famously or maybe infamously, they lacked any strategic goals in Afghanistan. They went in with the objective of defeating the Al Qaeda. They were successful in regime change. The Taliban was out within probably a couple of weeks. But after that, they went through successive phases where they tried to define what their objective in Afghanistan would be. They tried everything from building democracy to the war against drugs and so on. But eventually, none of that. We know now we are in a position to say that they did not really have any clear understanding of what their goals were. China and Russia began to feel insecure about American presence because of a number of reasons. There was, the large American military presence in Afghanistan. Secondly, they felt that the American presence in Afghanistan could be used to fuel, instability nearer their borders or within their countries and so on. So, right from the middle of that decade, maybe 2004, 2005, we see a completely different alignment of forces. Russia was probably the biggest enemy of the Taliban because Taliban and Russia go well beyond the days when Taliban was founded. Russia fought the Mujahideen in the 80s, so there was a lot of enmity. But we see that Russia started to build relations with the Taliban from around 2008, 2009, and today Russia is one of the countries which has given de facto recognition to Taliban. Similar is the case with China. We see China interacting with the Taliban. They cooperate and so on. So you have this background where from a situation where Taliban and Al Qaeda were viewed by both the adversaries of America, the great power adversaries of America, as dangers to a situation where the Taliban has pretty much been given de facto recognition, and both China and Russia today support the Taliban. And it is these are big reasons why the Taliban is able to sustain itself today. Without this regional support, it would not be possible. Now, let me come to the two cases that I, you know, uh, wrote about in my abstract, spoke about in my abstract. Syria is probably the mother of all proxy wars. We have not seen this kind of a proxy war since the days of the Cold War, and the battle lines. It's very difficult to actually kind of clear all the haze regarding who stood for what and what were the alignment of forces and so on. Syria is not an easy country to interpret because there was every great power was involved, every major regional power was involved, and so on. The Americans initially gave support to some factions which were opposed to the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but later when it emerged that these groups have connections to Al-Qaeda and they are jihadi groups, the Americans kind of, their support kind of dwindled. They probably continue to support, but the kind of outreach that we have seen in the last month, where Donald Trump visited Saudi Arabia and then he announced that the sanctions would be taken off and so on. This kind of a thing was completely unexpected. Even scholars of American foreign policy, realist scholars of American foreign policy, did not anticipate such a sudden turnaround, probably a 180-degree shift. Many felt that American policy would be cautious. It would go through a number of stages, and if the Syrian regime did prove itself, then there could be some form of normalization. Obviously, Donald Trump thinks that this is a way to bring Saudi Arabia back on the table. There are a lot of difference. I won't go into the strategic history of the Middle East, but the point is, America is doing it for some of its Gulf Arab allies. Also, and Trump hopes that he will have something back in return for the favor that he's shown to Syria. The result is that there is a group of people in power today in Syria who have passed in the Al Qaeda and were even associated with ISIS in some capacity. Okay, it's a shadowy regime. Mind you, we don't know much about who is part of that government. We know some of the figures. We know the leader Ahmad al Shara. We know the ministers and so on. But there are all kinds of people, all kinds of proposals. One of those, recent proposals was that there are a number of foreign fighters, jihadis, who find themselves in Syria today. And the latest proposal is that they should be inducted in the Syrian army because it would be better to have them in the army than to allow them to float around freely. So, and they might become attracted to ISIS or some other terrorist group. So this is the situation in Syria today. It is not a good situation, but we see that one great power, probably the greatest power, has extended a hand of friendship to Syria. Obviously, it has done so for its own strategic purposes. What is that? Briefly, Syria was the most important, vital element of the land bridge connecting Iran to Lebanon. This is, this Syria's close alignment with Iran was absolutely vital for Iran to move personnel, weapons, and so on. This is how Iran conducted its regional policy. Today, Iran is out. uh, Many of its Gulf opponents are very happy about it and they do not want Iran to return to the region. There are another set of regional powers like Turkey and Qatar who do not want to allow Saudi Arabia, UAE, and so on to have complete say in Syria. So they are trying to handhold Iran back into Syria, provided that they do the mediation. And then you also see the US, which is basically today normalizing relations with ex Al Qaeda and ex ISIS because it is viewing Syria through the strategic what it thinks is the best strategic outcome, which is Iran is weakened, Israel is strengthened, and it's also America's relations with its Gulf Arab allies have not been good over the last 5 6 years, so they want to shore up some of those relations as well. So that is how we see that to cut down Iranian influence and also Russian influence in Syria, they are okay to do business with the ex jihadis or maybe their current jihadis, right? And this is not new, mind you, for Americans. In the 80s, it was the Americans who, after all, prepared the Mujahideen that eventually went on to become the Taliban. Okay. Now, why does this happen? Uh, we may just think of it in terms of, it's just a cynical self-interest of states. They don't really stand for any ethics. They don't stand for any righteousness. They do as they please. And also, they do not really know what will be the outcome of their actions. The actions of the Americans created the Taliban. Maybe the actions of the Americans today in Syria is going to create some, future terrorist organization, unforeseen consequences, and so on. Uh, I will offer a set of reasons as to why this happens and why any kind of notion about a global zero tolerance policy towards terrorism is quite unlikely. I won't say it is impossible because nothing is impossible, but I will strongly argue that it is unlikely to take place. Please listen carefully. The first reason is that states operate in an anarchic world. They are concerned about their own interests. They are concerned about their security, and they always try to make a list of priorities. Whichever threat seems bigger to a particular state, they want to focus more resources and more attention to that threat compared to other threats. So today we are talking about you know possibly a multipolar world or a bipolar world if you think only US and China are great powers and so on. The situation has changed exponentially from 10, 15 years ago. So the Americans today are focused on great power conflict. They are okay to do business with the ex-Al Qaeda and ex. They already did business with Taliban. They're okay to do business with the ex-Al Qaeda because they want a kind of stable, favorable Middle East so that they can refocus on China in East Asia. Uh, Second reason, security competition between states is likely to get more attention. Now, this is one of the wagers of realism that states are primary actors, states are most important, actors, influential, consequential actors in international relations. This notion has been challenged from advocates of non-traditional security or cosmopolitanism and so on. Uh, but at the same time, somewhere we need to acknowledge that states are able to amass resources, particularly military resources, at a scale that nobody else can. And so, whenever there is any kind of a great power conflict, or if we take a regional lens, then whenever major powers go up against each other, all other threats, including non traditional threats, are probably going to take a backseat because ultimately states what draws the attention of states more than anything is the threat of uh, military aggression. Reason number three, although terrorism is morally detestable, terrorism is morally evil, uh, it may not always necessarily be opposed to the strategic interests of states. The agenda of some terrorist groups, even groups which may be universally recognized as terrorists, may be strategically beneficial. Now, this is the case with China's ambiguous policy, or we can say its complicity with the Pakistan-based terrorist groups. Why does China not allow the Security Council to pass resolutions against Pakistan-based terrorists and terrorist organizations? Because these terrorist groups fight against India. By attacking India, they draw the attention of India. They provoke India to at least set aside some resources, some security resources towards them. India's, India becomes preoccupied with Pakistan, and so there has to be a distribution of forces, distribution of resources. So China does basically India watching Pakistan or having two fronts, uh, you know, thinking about two fronts is a better outcome for China because then India does not focus entirely on China. Something we should be doing in the sense that if we really talk about geopolitical competitors, then it is China. China is our natural adversary, not Pakistan, not at the same scale. However, with the help of terrorism, Pakistan can keep India's attention fixated towards Pakistan to a certain extent, and this is the reason why China has built up Pakistan and will continue to build up Pakistan in the foreseeable future. So when India confronts Pakistan, it is really confronting the perhaps physical forces of Pakistan, but logistically, financially, technically, there's a lot of Chinese assistance. So therefore, although detestable, terrorism may not always be opposed to the strategic interest of states. In fact, in some cases, they converge wonderfully, and that is the reason why there is unlikely to be a zero tolerance policy towards terrorism. Reason number four, when security competition intensifies between great powers or even major powers in a region, terrorist groups come to be seen as strategic assets to gain a foothold within the adversary's territory. Terrorists become strategic assets, and to some extent, everybody is guilty of this. Of course, there is a lot of difference in the degree and in the manner in which terrorist groups are used, but groups which can be called terrorists, they are supported by many states. This is a common feature all throughout the world, and although states will never admit to it, they do this secretly. They don't admit to it because it is not moral to do so. However, when we when we uh, set strategic and moral interests side by side, although states will never agree that they can eschew morality, they do follow the strategic interests in more cases than not. Reason number five. Some states have historical, ideological, cultural, or religious affinities with some types of terrorism or some terrorist groups. In such cases, states will not be prepared to support a zero tolerance policy. The best example I can give of this is, I would say, even the support of Hamas after 7th October 2023. We cannot, there is no doubt that the actions of the Hamas on 7th October can be categorized as terrorism. However, we have not seen anything close to the kind of universal condemnation that the actions of that day would warrant. So, there are many things that people support or states support, and it's not a clear case of black and white. Okay, and the sixth reason is that it's historical. Basically, the fact that evidence for the kind of unanimity that would be required for a zero tolerance policy for terrorism simply does not exist. It has never happened. Even in the case of post 9/11, maybe there was a brief time in which states were able to cooperate, but even then they had points of difference. It's not that they there was a common action plan or common response to terrorism. There were many points of divergence, and cooperation came about, but well within the framework of strategic competition. So most states also do not want to become involved or take strong positions against groups that may be indulging in terrorism, but do not declare any kind of enmity or do not take part in hostilities against that country. For example, this is a point that was made by John Mearsheimer. He says that after the 9/11 attack, George W. Bush, the then president of the United States, he declared that terrorists everywhere in the world are enemies of the U.S. Mearsheimer criticized this declaration. He said that what is our business with terrorist groups that have nothing to do with America, that have not expressed any enmity towards America? We should only be concerned with terrorist groups, or we should only be concerned with those states or groups which directly threaten America. This is how foreign policy should be conducted. And I think this is a practical position because, after all, we cannot expect South American countries or in the countries in the Pacific to feel the same bite from the Pahalgam attack as we do, uh, s- because they may feel it for a few moments, maybe one day, maybe few people may even understand what kind of an inhuman act it was. But they are not going to fundamentally alter their foreign policy and throw in their support totally in favor of India, nor will they automatically start supporting a zero tolerance policy just because something happened elsewhere. And I think this is the way it goes. For example, a lot of actions of the Balochistan Liberation Army or Baloch Liberation Front today can be categorized as terrorism. Does it mean that we should not support Balochi, national movement? Probably that is not the way in which we are thinking. We are taking a strategic view of what is happening in Balochistan because we understand, and I think we understand quite correctly, that a weakened Pakistan or a Pakistan in which a secessionist movement or a nationalist movement, sub-nationalist movement gains momentum is better for us because their forces are going to get divided. They will get divided between focusing on India and focusing on Balochistan or any other part of their country. So these are some of the reasons why I think it is extremely unlikely, if not impossible, for a zero tolerance policy towards terrorism to materialize. I will just take 2 minutes and talk about terrorism so that there is no misunderstanding. Uh, Firstly, I unambiguously say that most forms, overwhelmingly large forms of terrorism, are evil and immoral, and I think there should be a zero tolerance policy towards terrorism. However, uh, when I interpret the policies adopted by states towards terrorism, or when I try to answer this question, why doesn't a zero tolerance policy towards terrorism materialize? That is when I come to this understanding that states are ultimately driven by their own self-interest, and they're unlikely to commit more than what their own security situation or security interests demand. Secondly, something needs to be said about terrorism itself. Terrorism, if you were to analyze it's what it essentially is, it's something which has a disproportionate impact. Uh, it requires only a few number of people, maybe a few cells, maybe a few groups, and they can wreak havoc. If you think of 9/11, if you think of 26/11, if you think of 7th October 23, if you think of Pelgam, these were essentially conspiracies hatched by a few people. It is not conventional military aggression. And its impact also is not like conventional military aggression. It is not in the nature of an invasion. But what it aims is destabilization, disruption, maybe opening communal fault lines, so endangering internal security and so on. Now, states are not entirely prepared in the sense that states prepare at scale. Military, army, navy, air force, and all of this. This is built at a certain scale, and it anticipates a certain kind of military aggression. However, terrorism is something that is of a very differently. It is basically like a modified version of guerrilla warfare. And most of the times, what happens is that states are unable to scale the response to terrorism to the nature of the terrorist act. It is something like, you know, there is an ant, let's say a big ant, its bite hurts and so on. Uh, States don't really know how to get rid of that ant. What states have is a hammer. They use the hammer on the ant. Many times, most of the times, the ant dies. But the floor also breaks, the structure may break. A hammer blow is not made to kill an ant. So there is a challenge of proportion that states face, and this is a dilemma in the sense that when a state tries to build up its forces, police or military forces, by focusing too much on counterterrorism, then they are likely to neglect their conventional preparation. And then, if we return to a situation where there is a conventional build-up of forces or a great power or major power conflict, then they stand to lose out. So this is the kind of security dilemmas that states are facing, and therefore I don't think that it should surprise us that states are open to many different kinds of politicking, what we call realpolitik, the problem of dirty hands, because fundamentally it is an anarchic world. There are no solutions, and we have to contend with what these security threats. So I will end here, and I think now we can get on with the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, it seems we have come to an end of today's discussion or session, and as no questions has been raised by the audience, so I would like to invite Apurva
No,
to
no.
formally.
Sorry to interrupt, Sulochana. I think
Yeah.
from our member Rahul Sharma has some questions, one or two. So
Yeah, Purva,
Rahul,
thank
can
you
you
so
hear
much.
me? So
Yeah, I'm
please, so
hearing you. I'm
please,
hearing
please.
you. Okay, all right, all right. Firstly, thank you, sir, for such a wonderful this lecture. and you have highlighted the this realist aspect to see the world uncertainties as well. As my topic, a basic topic where I'm actually working, that is in this mapping Indo-Pacific security dynamics and associate of India-Australia's critical defense technology. So
Rahul,
here I'm
sorry,
also
Rahul, 1 second. Your line was. Can you just repeat that because there was a disturbance?
all right, sir. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Sir, I just want to ask that you have highlighted this security dilemma in the present context. Don't you think that this security dilemma has some sort of linkages with security dynamics and security the term itself, as if we'll go with this John Hurt concept of security dilemma, then you'll get different perspectives as well as the other prominent experts, these scholars of this the concept of security dilemma. They have linked this security with security dilemma. Can we relate these three interrelated concepts and more make a one model to generalize these uncertainties, whether it is Indo-Pacific or in other parts where this contested the uncertain things happen? Security,
Absolutely.
security dilemma, and security this dynamics, interrelated
What's the
concepts.
last one? Security. Just repeat the last one.
Security dynamics.
Okay, so you're basically asking about security dilemma, and security
Dynamics.
dynamics. Okay, so I'll just say a couple of things about this since you're working on the Indo-Pacific.
Mhm.
Uh, the Americans, they have foreign policy debates internally, and there are two or three concepts which are quite influential. There is one idea called offshore balancing. What they do is they understand that they have, it is one of the most secure states in the world because on two sides of the US are two oceans, and there is no state which is powerful, which is even close to challenging US in its neighborhood. So it enjoys dominance in the Western Hemisphere. What offshore balancing means is that the US intervenes in any region of the world, and they have three principal regions in mind. First is Europe, second Middle East, and third East Asia. Uh, Russia and China are the two powers associated with Europe and East Asia, and Middle East in because of their energy, and it's a different kind of a calculation. Basically, the Americans take actions according, they set their strategy to not allow any hegemonic build-up in these three regions. They would like a dispersal of power in these three regions, and whenever there is any kind of an hegemonic maneuvering from any state in these uh, regions, they try to break it up. So for them, basically, they would like to continue dominating the Western Hemisphere while not allowing any other power to, uh, you know, become hegemonic. This is offshore balancing for the Americans. There are other ideas the Americans follow. Like many of them say that they should not. There are isolationists. There are also people who believe that democracy should be promoted and so on. From the point of view of China, I think the they obviously want to become hegemonic or something close to a hegemonic power in East Asia, in our part of it. The only question is how can they do that? Because if they try to do it in a manner that threatens many of the states in their neighborhood, or if they, threaten American position in the Pacific, then probably there would be war. On the other hand, the dilemma from the American side is that if the Americans adopt a policy where the Chinese feel that the best form of defense is attack, that if they don't attack, then the Americans are going to encircle them, and that could also lead to war. So that is what we are working with. There is a writer called Victor Davis Hanson, and he coined a term, a concept called Thucydides trap. I don't know if you are aware of this. You can look into this. He basically says that uh, and when a hegemonic power perceives that there is a consequential, substantial challenger on the rise. It feels that its power is threatened, its predominating position is threatened, and that is when it starts a war. And the name comes from the Peloponnesian War, when the sudden rise of Athens provoked Sparta to launch a war against Athens. Eventually, Sparta won. Athens was destroyed, but the net result was that the whole Greek system was destroyed over a period of time. So he says that this trap should be avoided by both America and China. So I think this is what is going to drive a lot of the security dynamics in Asia. There are two or three different levels of analysis. The first level is obviously American foreign policy. Since 1945, America has not been challenged in the Pacific. America's alliance system has worked pretty well, but today that alliance system is being challenged by China's rise, and lot of ground realities of the alliance system are changing, isn't it? Like Japan once again contemplating whether it is time for them to denuclearize and so on. So a lot of things are changing. The second level of the analysis would be China. How does China view? China's strategic culture is not to start. They are very cautious about starting wars. This comes from the time of Sun Tzu. They believe in winning wars without fighting a bullet. So they are not just going to start a war because it can be extremely costly for them. They may even be defeated because they face a rather big alliance. And if you look from China's point of view, they also have to contend with unpredictable neighbors like India. They also have a headache in the sense that many of their political and economic investments like CPEC or the Myanmar Economic Corridor are not really the safest investments. So they have a lot to deal with, and a lot will depend on whether they feel like they can manage to balance conflict with whatever they aspire, their own regional position, and so on, and also their calculations of whether they can win or not. And finally, another level of analysis would be the regional states themselves. We have seen that regional states exert great deal of pressure on how alliances work. This is the case with NATO. If you look at the main supporters of a greater role for NATO or greater American involvement in the war against Russia, then you will find that some of the countries which border Russia, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Central Eastern European countries like Poland, which have previous experience of Russian occupation, they are the ones who have been very clear-headed about opposing Russia. They have good reasons to do so because they have prior experience of Russian occupation. So something similar of that sort may happen in East Asia as well, where you see the nuclear debate coming back to Japan. South Korea, views China-Russia alignment, and North Korean soldiers going to fight in Ukraine. It has alarmed many people in South Korea. So there are a number of things of this sort which are, you know, playing out in East Asia, in Pacific and East Asia, and we are going to continue to see this thing. So when you try to dissect the security issues, security dilemma or security dynamics, as you said in the Pacific, then I think you can start with these three levels. should be quite rewarding for you.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, I was just trying to relate your concepts with my this PhD. So basically, I'm working this security dynamics. I was just reading that with this modern critical defense technology. Like as this is one of the aspects of security dynamics, how technology is actually reshaping this security architecture of Indo-Pacific. So this
So,
third level of
can you,
analysis.
you're breaking up, Rahul. Okay, sorry, can you just repeat once again?
No, can you hear me now? No, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you. There's a little bit of disturbance, actually. I
All
missed
right.
some words. That's all.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. I was just saying that thank you so much, sir, for highlighting or you giving insight. I was just relating your concept with idea and work. Like I'm working on this security dilemma from one perspective, one aspect that is from this critical defense technological perspective. Like this, how does this defense technology actually reshaping this architecture of Indo-Pacific? This dynamism also, if we will interlink with this security dilemma, then it also gives a new uh, idea or your crux of analysis to see the generalization of Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Probably the
think,
reason.
yeah, so you're talking about defense technology. I think it is, see, any, uh, the nature of uh, military is that even a small shift in the technological base can create large asymmetries. So the fact that we are talking about, AI, military, revolutionary military affairs, or network-centric warfare and so on. Yes, I think this is obviously. I mean, the point is that I think a lot of the defense technology, civil military fusion and so on, whatever we are talking about, I think this is going to drive a lot of conflict because there are, first of all, it is going to create asymmetries. Secondly, if you see what has been happening in Middle East or what has been happening in the Russia-Ukraine war, I think the fact that there is so much automation, it creates conditions favorable for more conflict. Probably it may or may not, I don't know, lead to lesser loss of human life, but definitely the fact that there is greater automation is going to drive conflict and fear is going to increase. Talk about an AI arms race. I think it is true. We are living through it, and this is the first part of it. All militaries are going to modernize, and we will see different kinds of alliances and partnerships shaping up. There will be also a much greater focus on defense commercial relationships. We have seen how defense commercial relationships between countries which are not geographically in the same region can actually create hostile relations and even enmity between countries. Look at what Turkey giving weapons to Pakistan or India giving weapons to Armenia has done. Basically, India and Turkey are now, they have a much more degraded diplomatic relationship. We can almost call them enemies today. So some of this is going to happen, and defense technology. I think you're studying the right topic today. I am also, a student of how defense modernization and particularly AI network-centric warfare are coming into the discourse. Yeah, this is probably going to shape the entire security environment. Uh, War, as we know it, is changing, and it is going to surprise us in many ways. So that is my answer for you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And I do expect in future uh, I will collaborate. We will get an opportunity. If I could get an opportunity to collaborate some work, then definitely I am definitely going to work.
Absolutely. Apurva has
Thank
my
you.
number. You contact me whenever you want.
Thank you so much, sir. My
Yes,
pleasure.
sir. Sir, we have received some questions in the comment sections. I hope you
Sure.
will see these questions. give me.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this
sure.
is the first question.
Okay. So he's
Is it
asking a
visible,
question.
sir?
Yeah, it is visible. I can see it. I'll read
Okay.
the question and then I will try to answer it. How does the ecological perspective complement or challenge the realist view on the causes of terrorism? My answer to this would be that the ecological perspective, I don't exactly know what Rahul here has in mind, but I think he might be having some of the studies coming out of sub-Saharan Africa, where desertification and jihadi terrorism or the rise of the Islamic State in that part of Africa, which has become, I think, the number one contributor to terrorism. Maybe he has something of that guy sort in mind. My answer to this question would be that it's true that we have a new dimension or a new source of what is creating terrorism. But as far as state responses are concerned, I think that won't change all that much. Great powers tend to think in terms of spheres of influence. And when they sense an opportunity that another great power or a major power is faltering, or locals have developed some kind of animosity towards the great power because of whatever reason. It could be historical reason, like many of the Sahel states, for example, were under French colonialism, and later on France became the main security assistance provider, economic assistance provider. But many locals do not like it, so they have recently broken. Their economic military relationship with France because they see that there is another benefactor, usually in the form of Russia, uh, who came in and stepped in that position. Whether it is really going to change the terrorist landscape or not, uh, it is difficult to tell. Also, ecological ecological source of terrorism makes it very difficult to counter. But the point is that great powers are going to be interested in maneuvering. It also will matter a great deal which region of the world we are talking about. If we are talking about sub-Saharan Africa, then probably the great powers are interested, but only in a certain way. It is not really a theater from which the great powers expect any great security challenge to emerge, but they probably sense economic opportunities there. So their responses will be patterned on that kind of an understanding. Whereas for the regional states, it could be much more of an, well, if not an existential threat, a really credible threat to security, disruption, and so on. So they will probably approach it in a quite a different way. I hope that answers it.
Sir, this is another question from Kolyan Roy.
Okay, Polan Roy asks, are regional organizations in Asia capable to some extent of creating collective mechanisms to combat terrorism? Kalyan, my answer is that collective mechanisms are going to be created on the strength of whether the members of that mechanism feel that there is some security threat faced from whichever group or whichever individual or whatever we are talking about. It will not be on the strength of the institutional mechanism. It will be on the strength of perhaps a common perception or convergence of interests. Organizations are bound to be reflections of the equations, power equations between different states. So if they come together and think that yes, it is probably better for a particular regime or to be in power, or if they decide that a particular group is bad for the entire region, then yes, there is a chance that create collective mechanisms will be created, but mechanisms are not going to deliver by themselves. We need to understand how a terrorist group, for example, can pose security threats to different countries individually from the perspective of those countries. If those countries individually feel threatened, then they may come together, but there will be differences. Don't think that there is going to be some kind of a common platform. And I would give the example of the Taliban in Afghanistan today. Uh, there is quite a bit of, you know, not cooperation, I would say, but there is some amount of acceptance of the Taliban. I think most of the regional states today feel that the Taliban being in power, not the obviously not a very good outcome, but at least gives a measure of stability to that country. But you see that many of the member states, for example, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS, they can the SCO can open relations with the Taliban and relate of all the states who make up the SCO can be mediated through the SCO. But do we see that? We don't see that. We see Russia interacting with the Taliban, China interacting with the Taliban, India interacting with the Taliban, and there is every country takes notice of what the other country is doing because ultimately they are concerned about how the diplomacy conducted by another state can, can have consequences for itself. So, more than collective mechanisms, I would say focus on the bilateral uh, aspects of this process.
O- Okay, sir. Sir, from Nilanjan Banerjee, he asks two
Yes.
questions. First one is here.
Okay. Okay. First of all, Nilanjan is my close friend. So, hi to Nilanjan. Thanks for turning up. He asks, is there also a social constructivist angle where certain states do not interpret certain groups as not indulging in terror at all and interpreting that in terms of liberation or just resistance? Nilanjan, I covered this under, I think it's the fifth reason, and I'll just read it out again. So when I was discussing why it is extremely unlikely for a zero tolerance policy towards terrorism to materialize, I said that one of the reasons is that some states may have historical, ideological, cultural, or religious affinities with some groups or some types of terrorism, or at least some justifications of terrorism. In such cases, states will not be prepared to support zero tolerance policies. Whether we call it social constructivist or we name it something else, I think the fact remains that some people or some states, some cultures, they have affinities towards certain positions or towards certain causes. And when what we think is terrorism or what can even objectively be classified as terrorism is is used in the pursuit of such cases, then definitely the people who support that cause are not going to uh, you know say it with so much clarity and so much strength that yes, it is terrorism. Because if you stand for the cause, then I mean the means can be elastic, can be flexible. So yes, that is my answer to you. You may call it social constructivist, or you can also approach it through a shared affinities, shared values, or shared causes, etc.
This is another one, sir.
Okay, from Nilanjan again, he asks, as geopolitics where anti-India terror groups
Yes.
are far away from most states, is only a policy of liberalism with strong trade the only way for India, or are there other uh, strategies to gain support? No, I think, Nilanjan, that we need to be realistic. Firstly, let us not confuse trade or economics with security. Uh, Economics is more often than not a result of good security. If we are secure, then we can prosper economically. If there are security threats, then we cannot prosper at all. Or even if we do prosper, but we don't take care of our security, then there will be nobody to enjoy that prosperity. So that's a like first observation. Second thing. is that I think a more realistic terror policy would be that we take whatever threats we face from whichever terrorist organization, but for in our case, we should not stop a terrorist organization. We should understand that, and this is something that we have all understood now very clearly that terrorism in our country is mainly being promoted by another state, and so we need to take aim at the state. So, with Operation Sindur, but not only now, earlier as well, we have kind of crossed the Rubicon. We have crossed a certain Lakshman Rekha, and this realization is now we are. It's not only dawning on us. We are now in a position where we can, escalate this even further. So that's the thing. We should prioritize our own security interests. If terrorism is emanating from a country, then we need to be very clear-headed about what kind of support, what kind of assistance, what kind of goals and objectives are being, pursued through terrorism, and we should mount a holistic response against terrorism. As far as linking up with struggles against terrorism or causes against terrorism all through the world, I think maybe we should try to avoid comprehensive generalizations, but at the same time we can work out pragmatic common areas or convergences, and I think this has a lot to do with relatability. For example, uh, we saw a lot of India Israel, I wouldn't say solidarity, uh, cooperation as well. It happens for a particular reason. That doesn't mean that Israel's security environment or what Israel does in response to the threats it faces is anything similar to what India does. There's a lot of difference between the two, but yet we find some sense of solidarity. You would see the same when India has so many terrorism agreements and cooperation with Saudi Arabia, UAE, so many Middle Eastern countries, so many Western countries. It's not that we face the same threat. It's not that our security environment is the same. But there is an understanding. There is an understanding that there is some similarity in the nature of these threats and so. So that is how, according to me, a more realistic, pragmatic security policy towards terrorism can materialize. I think the main issue here is to not think in absolutist terms, also not think in idealistic terms, not also give too much weight to institutions. We can work out our security policies, and if we do find that there is some other country which is facing terrorism, and if there is any kind of cooperation that we can build with them, that can be done. We can do it, bilaterally. We can do it multilaterally. Even on international platforms, we can, create a lot of cooperation. The only thing to avoid is that we shouldn't, become cheerleaders for a zero tolerance policy towards terrorism in the sense that it is a good idea. uh, we should keep the rhetoric. We can speak in these terms, but we should be very clear-headed about the kind of policy that we actually want to run. Uh, Basically, the whole lecture, what I've tried to focus on is that instead of just fighting against combating against terrorism, combating terrorism, or trying to have cooperation on terrorism related issues, we should be very careful in understanding that ultimately it is the states, relationships between states, which determine a lot of our foreign policy, and rightly so, because states are they operate at a very different scale compared to terrorist organizations. So, provided that our relationships with states are kind of favorable to us, I think we would be in a much better position to deal with the terrorist threat. Whereas if we do not take care of relationships with states, then terrorism probably can cause much greater harm and poses a far greater security threat than otherwise.
Okay, Dada, there are one or two questions from the audience. If it is all right with you, may I
Yeah, yeah,
take this question?
yeah, yeah. Please, 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 please. Go ahead.
Okay, okay, okay,
Please.
Dada. Okay. So here is the question from Montu Bhagat.
Okay, so he's talking about hybrid threats, terrorism, cyber warfare, state-backed militias. These are methods of how terrorism functions, and there is novelty in this. I already said that states are not all that much prepared in, there's an abundance of resources, but how exactly to use those resources is a difficult question. And secondly, there is a strategic uh, angle as well, that if too many resources are given over to combating terrorism, then conventional threats can be neglected. Having said that, whatever is mentioned here on the screen now, blending terrorism, cyber warfare, state-backed militias, I think basically we have to take each. And if you're asking from from an agencies or enforcement point of view, then these things are new. So some amount of margin has to be given. These things should be studied. And once we get an understanding of these things, then there has to be political will to actually deal with these issues. But I would like to make one point here. It's that one of the reasons why rival states or adversaries like to promote, whether it's terrorism or any other kind of lawless activities, or basically antisocial activities in general, is that it breaks down social cohesion. uh, when law and order suffers, public morale goes down, and when public morale goes down, uh, there are consequences across the board. There are economic consequences, social consequences, and so on. When there is this kind of an environment of decay, then it is much easier to weaken a country from the inside. And this is one of the reasons why adversaries do spend good amount of resources to weaken countries from the inside, because sovereignty has two aspects, external and internal. If a country is weakened from the inside, naturally it is not going to be a unified, strong power. It will not be able to meet its adversary at the same level. This is the main reason uh, why states invest, and also it's a low cost option. You see, ultimately, wars cost a lot of money, military modernization costs a lot of money, but promoting a few terrorists, or you know, promoting the drug trade or promoting antisocial activities in another country, it's cheap. And the last thing I would say is that the reason why terrorist groups got in the business of drugs or counterfeit currency and so on is that it requires a lot of money. And state sponsored terrorism is one thing. That is when a state is giving all the money or technical assistance or weapons and so on. So the terrorist organization need not do anything except plan and execute operations. But it is not so easy anymore, because there is a lot of surveillance. There are, institutions have gotten quite advanced. So really, the reason why terrorism has become hybrid, or terrorist organizations have broken into economic space, they are no longer only political actors. They don't just operate with political objectives. They also have an economic dimension. Is purely for their sustainability, and it also gives them some, some room for maneuvering themselves. So it is basically an attempt by many terrorist organizations to live off the same population they are fighting against. This is something that armies in history used to do. There is something called living off the enemy, which means an army goes into a country and it lives off its that country's resources. This is a way in which terrorist organizations are trying to get financial autonomy.
Mm, yes, sir. This is Priya Das.
Okay. Yeah, Priya asks if realism prioritizes national interest and power, how should states respond to terrorism without undermining global cooperation? Priya, that's the point that I have made that there is limited global cooperation and the cooperation takes place when interests converge. But cooperation takes place within the overarching framework of conflict. States will view each other with suspicion. And if you ask any policymaker, anybody with experience of statecraft, they will say that yes, terrorism is a big threat. I am not at all, downplaying the threat of terrorism. But when there is a formidable adversary in the form of a state, then, as somebody in statecraft, you would worry more about that state because there is the possibility of military aggression. There is the possibility of all kinds of issues related to power, in which one state can really harm another state. So that is the reason why states prioritize their own national interest and power. Because suppose something of that kind happens, then where do states turn to? There is nobody to turn to. There is no third person. There is no interlocutor. There is nobody. International organizations work, but only to a certain extent. If, for example, has the Security Council been able to stop the wars which are going on? It can't, because structurally there are limitations. When Security Council members are themselves part of a conflict, why would they vote in favor of stopping that conflict? So, cooperation will take place, but within the basic framework of conflict.
Okay, sir. This is the final and the last question, I think, because I already exceed the time what I have promised to you, that 1.5 hour.
No problem.
Okay, so this is
That
the
is
final and
fine,
the last question.
and I'm okay, Apurva. Don't mind about that. That is fine. I'm very happy to
Okay,
take
sir.
questions. Okay. So Neha asks, what is my view of the all-party delegation? To what extent can this help India gain global attention? I will, I have a couple of views on this. The first is that I'm very happy about the kind of unifying effect that Palgam has had. I have not seen this for a very long time. We in India are very much, used to a lot of polarization. So the fact that there is some amount of unity, a good amount of unity, this has really been, I mean, we shouldn't really be talking about anything good in relation to Pelgam, but if there is something good which has come out of it, it is just that. Okay. Uh, so it, as far as national unification is concerned, the fact that, the reason why in Pahalgam there was religious profiling and the brutal way in which people were murdered. I think the main motive behind this particular method of the killings was to create internal unrest in India. What it has done is kind of the opposite. There's a lot of politics going on, but still, I'm happy that there is some healthy unity. But as far as the international outreach is concerned, I think when it comes to Pakistan, there are three or four important states that we have to really, if diplomacy matters vis-a-vis Pakistan, it's those states. There is the United States, obviously. Then there is China. And then I think the Commonwealth countries, because there are a lot of Pakistanis. Okay. So I think if international public opinion has to matter, yes, it can matter. For example, if there are some resolutions in the General Assembly and so on, It can matter, but eventually, whether Colombia, Ecuador, or some African country supports us or not, I don't think it is really that consequential. Whether we win a resolution in the General Assembly or not, that is not all that consequential. International opinion will matter if that international opinion translates into policy. So that is the reason why I say America, China, and the Commonwealth countries are important, because if America changes its policy towards Pakistan, then the establishment uh, will will feel the consequences of that. Uh, if China were to change its policy towards Pakistan, then the establishment will feel the consequences. And if Commonwealth countries, obviously they will not have the kind of say that US and China have, but there are a lot of Pakistanis. So if something of that sort happens, then Pakistanis will feel consequences. So that is why I think Indian diplomacy should focus on these three target audiences, and even within that target audience we should have a very clear message. The other thing that I would like to observe with regard to the all party delegations is that if you compare the kind of messaging that the Indian delegations have been doing and the Pakistani delegations have been doing, you'll see that the Pakistanis have substantially expanded the scope. They are talking about strategic issues. They're talking about Indus Water Treaty. They're talking about nuclear war. They're talking about regional peace and cooperation. Whereas, the Indian delegations have been much narrower in the sense that we are taking up the issue of terrorism and why we were justified in doing what we were doing. I think something of we should kind of get our narrative on Kashmir right. We should be able to explain to the world when Pakistan raises Kashmir and says that there is a dispute and so on. We should preempt that by explaining to the world that look, this is the issue. There is no issue. You know, that kind of a thing. Or when it comes to Indus Water Treaty, how did our policy come to this point where we basically tolerated 60 years of aggression and then we have decided to hold it in abeyance or suspend it? So it does not really amount to a war over water at all. It does not mean that we are going to deprive Pakistan of water. This is the kind of narrative that Pakistan is taking out to the world, and we should try to engage Pakistan in the sense that we should go out and tell them that just like every other issue, the Pakis are lying in these matters too. Finally, to end this answer, I would just say that we believe that we are going to solve these issues bilaterally, and we don't want the world to get involved. That is correct. We don't need any intervention. But if we are going to engage with public opinion, that doesn't mean that we keep our messaging also limited to it's our issue, we will solve it. Go and speak properly, address the strategic issues, give out our strategic point of view, our goals, not all the goals. We shouldn't say that, we are going to dismember Pakistan. No need to say such things, but speak about the strategic issues and then make a case for why we are morally justified in pursuing that strategic issue.
Okay, Dada. I think we have now reached the conclusion of our today's lecture, Dada. Okay,
Yeah, I hope it was
so
good.
I would like yes, yes, Dada, yes. So I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Sarkar on his engaging and insightful lecture. It was truly enjoyable. We appreciate the time and effort you dedicated to this wonderful lecture session, and we eagerly anticipate, Dada, more lectures from you. Thank you so much. I would like
Okay.
to extend my gratitude to our viewers for their participation and for the insightful questions. Furthermore, I wish to express my sincere appreciations to the members of Decoding Realpolitik for their invaluable support. Lastly, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to Ms. Sulochana Ramodamu for her excellent introduction of our esteemed speaker and for hosting today's sessions. Thank you. Uh, hope we will listen you in future.
Sure,
So
Apurva. Thank you for inviting me. And yes, we will definitely have more of this. And I appreciate the initiative you have taken and bringing together research scholars. It's fantastic. Continue to do the work you're doing, and definitely we will have more interactions.
okay, thank you once again. Please stay tuned for more exciting sessions. Viewers, look forward to seeing our next Sunday. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and Shubharatri.
Thank you. Good night.